Marsters, and today we are going to be going over some indicators for assistive technology under 504 for students with special needs. I am the assistive technology specialist for Europe East, and we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it. The last time to review, we spent about an hour really highlighting a lot of the universal accessibility features within a lot of the curriculums. We highlighted some of the tools and resources that are available to many students and teachers to provide different accommodations. Today we're going to be focusing more on the structures. How do we consider what is the process that we might go through within a 504 team meeting, and what are some things we might do, some questions we might be asking. Really trying to provide that equal access that to prevent discrimination through that 504 plan. And it's more than just providing everybody the bike or providing everybody the computer. We are really trying, or the accommodation, we're really trying to tailor fit that accommodation to the needs of the students to provide that equity and to provide that access. So this is just a brief overview of what we're going to be doing today. So starting from determination to implementation and then evaluation of that assistive technology process. Today, I talk a lot about best practice, evidence-based practice. I'm going to be giving you some templates. We're going to be talking a lot about ideas, recommendations, and I do recognize that when I'm sitting here talking, it can be very clean, point A to point B. But in practice, as you're sitting in a meeting with time constraints and all these things going on, that it can be messy. And so what I'm encouraging you all today is to take components of this, take some components of the resources I'm showing you, and tailor it to meet the needs of your 504 team and the needs of those students. What I'm going to reference today is this cycle, and we're going to be talking about different components of what this cycle looks like. So what is the problem? And really identifying that task or those tasks that student is struggling with in the classroom that they need accommodations. We want to know why that's occurring, and then we really kind of get into the trial and error process of trialing different features, trialing different technologies, working on implementation, and then measuring to see if it's effective or not. And so we're going to kind of go through what are some indicators or what are some steps to meet the design of this process, this flow. So at first we're really going to highlight on identifying the problem, that setting that it's occurring, and then what do we do about it, and starting to consider and choose different assistive technology options. And so what we're really looking for are steps to identify and to document the need for AT devices and services within that 504 plan. And so we want to make sure that, what is it we're looking at? We're really looking at, for a 504 plan, that equal access to curriculum and those extracurricular activities and that progress in the general ed setting. How do we come up with this idea that the student is struggling, or if we are trialing different assistive technologies, what data points do we look at? And we want to make sure that we're really sitting down as a team and looking at a lot of different data points from that your general ed teachers might be bringing to the table, the student, the family. There's a lot of formative assessment data out there with the DCAS, summative assessment. The classrooms are having different assessments, different assignments, observations. How is the student responding to be doing in a classroom? What happens when they're given opportunities to use different technologies or different features? So really trying to pull from a wide area of information. There's not one specific test that we look at for determining the needs for an assistive technology device or service. We're really trying to look at the overall student and the environment and the tasks that student is engaging in. We do want to make sure that our 504 team members have collective knowledge and skills. Part of that was, the last time we met, giving you that overview. You don't have to be an expert in everything, but know some of the features that are available. Or if you don't know, have a kind of a plan in place to get information. Do your ISSs have the information? Does your ET, are they knowledgeable about different features? Is some of your general ed teachers might have a lot of knowledge, and then also your special ed teachers, and of course any kind of assistive technology specialist that you might have access to. I do think it's important that we really document the assistive technology within that 504 plan. As you all know, I'm sure you've had situations where a student will move in to your school and have a vague 504 plan with vague accommodations, and it really doesn't paint a clear picture about what are these accommodations supposed to do, what are the key features, and it causes confusion, it causes anxiety, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. So really try to list the features, why that student needs that specific accommodation within the plan or those minutes, so that we know that our students are going to be moving a lot. On average, our military connected students are moving on average about 6 times in their school career. So let's make sure their plans have the proper documentation to support that. One model that I talk to our special ed folks about to help with this identifying what are some needs of the student, it's something called the SET model. And you don't have to, this is just a framework. You can pull and take, and if you like certain pieces, but I want to kind of give you some tangible strategies and some tangible resources to use to help with your consideration. So as you are looking at at the student and what that student might need, we typically use this, let's identify the strengths and needs of the student first. This is done collaboratively. We might write down some of their strengths, some of their needs, what are they interested in, their goals within this section here. And then we're looking at the environment. As we all know, different teachers have different classroom setups. Are we in a 21st century school with more open concept? Are we in a traditional? Do we have teachers that are doing a lot of flexible grouping and kids are moving around left and right? Are they in rows? Do we have access to technology? What does that look like? Are kids doing a lot of worksheets? Are they doing a lot of project-based learning? Are they doing work out of a workbook? Are they doing stuff online? So that environmental consideration, what the class looks like, can really impact the kind of tools that we use. What is their access to a cow? Are they using Chromebooks? Are they using PCs? Is there something else? So really we want to make sure we're being considerate of that environment as we're trying to consider what tool we might want to use with that student. And then this is, to me, is a real important one, is identifying the task. Just saying that the kid struggles, that's too vague. What is it the student is struggling with? What specific tasks in the classroom is that student having difficulty or not being able to access due to their disability? And what are some accommodations then that we might then consider to support that task? So we use the information from the student, the environment, and task to then identify some of the tools that we might want to use with that student. Oftentimes, the tools are the fun parts for a lot of people. That's where everybody wants to spend the time. Let's explore the tools, but without really looking at the student, the environment, and the task, we end up going on these big fishing expeditions where we find all these cool tools, but they might not be the right tool to support that student and their need. So really having a conversation, looking at these different areas, can help pinpoint what features we need and what features we should try to implement with that student, so that we're not always hunting around and fishing just for random stuff. Some other tools to help you. So we've talked about the SET model here, and I have a link to this to these documents within here. Joy Zabala is the original author of these SET documents. We also have the DODEA AT Accommodation Guide that I modified based off of work from Georgia and Arizona. And so I do encourage you all to look at this. I'm not a huge fan of checklists, but this gives you a place to start. And I did reference this a little bit last time. And what this does is this provides an overview of specific reading tasks, different tools that might be used in the classroom, some suggested accommodations, modifications, and then different AT solutions that might be used to accommodate that. So I do encourage you to reference this tool, and it's not an all-in-one stop shop. There are other things that might not be listed, and what I don't want is just people going through and just check marking everything on here. We want to make sure that we are really using that information from the student, the environment, and the task to help guide what tools we're choosing from that accommodation guide. And then as a reminder as well, we also have the Assistive Technology Lending Library for Europe East. that I do encourage you to, if you're looking for certain tools or resources, to take a few moments and go through the different tools we have available either at the school level or tools that we have available for checkout at the district. So again, these are not all the assistive technology that's available, but this gives you a good starting point. I would also reference the training that we did last time with all the universal supports built into the curriculum. So now we've taken the time, we've really looked at the student, we've identified some potential tools, some tasks, we've highlighted some things in the environment that might help or hurt us. Now we're really looking at choosing and trialing that assistive technology and implementing it. So these are some of the features that we really want to make sure, the components we really want to make sure the 504 teams are supporting. The question that I will ask is, everybody that works with the student, so if a student's a middle school student or a high school student and multiple classes or even elementary with the different specialist teachers, does everyone who works with that student, are they aware of how, when, and where that AT accommodation will be used? So clear communication, and that really does fall on that 504 team to do that. When we're looking at implementation, are we referencing that within that 504 plan? And again, I know I am talking like best practice and the reality that it might not be as clear as you'd like, but is there at least something there that kind of paints a picture of what this is supposed to look like? Does everybody have the 504 plan? Does everybody have the training and the information they need to effectively use the AT? And again, this is where things get a little muddy. We'll talk about kind of elephants in the room later, but you know, there's a misconception that that services are only, direct services are for individualized education plans. That is, you know, specialized instruction, that is the purpose of an IEP. 504s are typically just the accommodations. That said, somebody still might need to teach the student how to use the device, or the software. Somebody still might need to teach the student or the teachers that are supporting that student what these software features do, or how to use this, or how to troubleshoot it. So while services might not be like ongoing and part of an IEP plan, the 504 might have to have some sort of component in there where we're just addressing the logistics of implementing it. You know, it just as we give a kid a piano, they don't become a musician. We just don't throw a kid or throw technology at a student and expect them to become proficient with it. There might need to be some, or I'm not saying might, there will need to be some sort of plan to support that student. We really want the AT to be integrated in the curriculum because that's the whole purpose. We're trying to provide access to general education. We're trying to provide access to the curricular materials, to the curricular expectations. And that we do want to make sure that it's technology. The student, it's not if, it's when. That student is going to experience some frustration, or that teacher is going to experience some frustration or some problem with that technology at some point. It really is important that the team is ready and willing to facilitate that problem-solving process when that happens. So again, this is not required, but this is a recommendation. If you are the type of team that really likes to have things delineated, you want to know who's responsible, timelines, you want to have, you know, a clear path of what implementation might look like, you might want to use something like this, where you identify the equipment that's going to be used, the status, does the school have it, are you checking it out, is it something that needs to be purchased, who's on the team, what are the type of tasks that student is working on, who's responsible for that, is that a general ed responsibility, is the counselor following up, is somebody else following up with that? What kind of training is needed for this accommodation to be effectively implemented? So, and then who's going to provide that training? Is there somebody locally? Can it be a YouTube video? Is there an online training module? Are we calling somebody in? But let's address what is it that the student or the staff needs to learn, and then who is going to provide that training. I will say, if you're requesting somebody like a district person to train, make sure you've talked to them first before putting their names on something like that, so that they can then plan accordingly. And then looking at that classroom implementation, this of course is IEP goal, 504. What are the specific tasks in the classroom, the curricular areas that we're hoping that accommodation will address, and then who's responsible for helping with that, helping that student then use that assistive technology for that accommodation. And again, that might not be a lot of direct services, but it just might be following up with encouraging the student to use, letting the student know where to go to troubleshoot, things of that nature. Again, if we have a student that is requiring this accommodation, does the student need to use it at home? If it's something like an online access, does the student know how to pull up the curriculum online at home? Do they know how to pull it up on different devices to access the text-to-speech? Have resources been made available? Have they been made aware? Do they know all their login information? All that stuff. So this really kind of goes through the process, and then later on we're going to talk more about this, but monitoring. So we've put all these accommodations in place. Are they effective? Are the AT tools working to accommodate that student's disability, or is it not effective? So if you're that linear kind of mindset, you might really appreciate this type of form. I also have another planning document that is more just open-ended questions. Not quite as linear, but these are questions for the 504 team to ask themselves. So starting out, what are the important activities? You've heard me already talk about that, identifying the tasks. What are the barriers? What are some potential tools that might remove those barriers? What are some different accommodations? Because sometimes assistive technology isn't the right accommodation. There are other accommodations that might be effective. So how are we going to use these? Identifying the major areas. I like this when we're looking at determining if this accommodation is working. I really like this statement. What will it take to convince you and others that the student is making progress? So what kind of data are we collecting to show that it's needed, that it's working, that it's not working? How do we convince ourselves that yes, it is working, or no, it's not? So again, these are more just open-ended questions that then you could then reference, and you might put some of these in the minutes. Maybe you have this form. Again, I leave that up to you to figure out how you might use this. I understand that you might not go through steps all 1 through 12, that you might kind of cherry pick based off of your needs. So we've identified the problem, why it's occurring. We've considered assistive technology using some of the resources above, the DODEA consideration guide, the lending library materials, the information from our last webinar. We've been trialing the assistive technology. We have that implementation plan, so we know how it's going to be used, who supports it, what it looks like, in what curricular area. Now we are monitoring that progress. And so we do want to make sure, and I think this happens a lot, and I think it's just because we get so busy and there's just not enough time in the day, but we provide these accommodations and then we don't follow up with them maybe as frequently as we should. So having those interviews with the student, the teacher, looking at the grades, are those accommodations really being as effective as we would like? Are we seeing that the assistive technology is supporting that student's access to the curriculum? What kind of data are we using? I'm not a huge fan of separate data sheets. We already have so many data points within the school with, this is what kids' writing looks like with the intervention. This is what it looks like without the intervention. This was a test without the accommodation. This was a test with the accommodation. This is what the student reports. This is what the teacher reports. There are a lot of things already out there. If you do feel the need for a data sheet, that's fine, but I'm trying to not add more things to the plate, but just use what we already have as well. If you find that it's not working, what's the plan? Is it the wrong tool? Is it maybe poor implementation? Is there something going on that we haven't considered? But having that conversation with the team and really seeing, do we need to change that accommodation, or do we need to add something, take something away?
Are you there?
And if we are changing anything, making sure again we're sharing that with all our 504 team members, so that all the specialists, all the the high school, middle school teachers are aware of the changes and are making sure they're implementing the latest and most current accommodation for that student. So if it is working, great. We just continue on cycling along. If it's not, then we start the process over again. If it's not working, well, what's the problem now? Maybe the start of the year, the student was working on very rote tasks, and there wasn't a huge need for assistive technology, or the tools or features that were being used at the time were more than sufficient. But later on in the year, they're going more into application, the rigor is increasing, and all of a sudden the tools that were in place in September aren't meeting our needs in February. So that's where we would then kind of relook at that problem and see what needs to be adjusted. Maybe it's the tool, maybe it's just the implementation, but we need to be fluid with this. And I know that typically we meet on this every 12 months, but there might be a requirement at times to meet more frequently if that accommodation is not meeting those needs. So this is a big one, especially with the 504, because as we've talked about, there aren't a lot of direct specialized instruction within that 504 team, or that's provided to that student. There might be some training, there might be some troubleshooting, but that student is probably not getting weekly support or direct instruction with this assistive technology. So we need to really make sure we are doing activities to empower that student to be a strong advocate for themselves and to be able to use and function with this assistive technology as independently as possible. So as much as we can involve that student in the planning process, the implementation and evaluation, great. Granted, that might look very different from a 3rd grader to a 12th grader. So just kind of being aware of that and adjusting accordingly. We want to make sure that we are explicitly teaching the student how to use this and importantly, how to advocate for it. So if that student goes into a classroom and that accommodation that's so effective for them is not readily available, maybe all the computers are checked out, maybe the teacher isn't allowing access to the online materials, whatever, we want that student to be able to advocate for and problem solve when that's happening, when that doesn't happen. So, or when that happens, they need to know what to do to make sure they can enable that accommodation. Because as we know, once they leave secondary, if they go to post-secondary or anything after that, they're going to have to advocate for themselves, and they're going to have to self-identify, and they're going to have to be the ones to initiate these accommodations. So we need to make sure that we're providing the student those opportunities within our elementary, middle, and high school programs. And a big one is the student needs to have somebody they know to go to. A lot of times it might be the counselor. I know I work with a student at one of the high schools that's very independent with the technology she uses. I usually get maybe an email from her once a quarter where she has an issue accessing something on a device, but she's the one that initiates, and she knows she has people at the school she goes to help, and she also knows that she can reach out to me. And so she is demonstrating very strong advocacy skills and knows exactly what to do when something is not working. And that, I think, is really the goal that we want for those students. And if we can help us identify problems in the classroom, having them articulate, I'm really struggling with this, or something is not working for me in that class, I think it helps us better match up those tools for that student. So I do have a couple resources for the team, because I do like to make sure you have some tools in your toolbox. The first one is it's an older document, and I like it for our elementary and maybe some of our middle students. And I really wouldn't have the students probably fill out this workbook, but I might use this as a questionnaire. So what it does is it goes through some scenarios, and it has a list of options for the students and a list of questions that you might ask the student. So it goes through a scenario of Chuck struggling to do work in the classroom, and then it talks about, what are some problems with doing your homework, what are some tools that work for you, what are some classes that are hard for you, in your classes that are hardest, what is the hardest part of that class? Is it copying from the board? Is it understanding what the book is saying? Is it writing your math problems? But it really asks some nice questions. And I typically do not have the student actually write in the workbook, but I might use this just as a script to get some information from the student that really help them be part of that process to identify what their needs are. And then as we start looking at tools, it asks a lot of, has the student kind of rate, like how do you like using this tool? What's good about it? What's not? Is it complicated? Is it easy? What do you really like about it? What's something that's maybe slowing you down in the classroom? So this gives you a nice script to follow and some different scenarios if you want to read with the student to kind of go through and match some of those technology tools. Something else that I like for our high school, so this is really kind of our elementary, middle, maybe some high. I do like, there's something called the Quiet Post-Secondary Self Matrix for students. It is designed for students at high school and for kids going off to college to do kind of a safe self-evaluation matrix to rate themselves on their AT skills. And so it's useful for students and for the 504 teams to really identify kind of the student self-awareness and their ability to problem solve assistive technology. And this is designed to support that transition process. And so what you would do is you would sign up for the free account, and the student would then go through and would rate themselves on these different areas from AT self-awareness, their knowledge of legal rights, self-advocacy. And for a student that's going to be leaving high school and going on to college, I would really recommend that this be part of the process, that they go through and kind of rate what they need, what they're good at, what they might need some support with, so that when they graduate high school, they're able to advocate for themselves and their next journey. So a lot of elephants in the room. I know I've talked a lot like these great resources and all this great collaborative planning and documenting and data collection, and it comes down to manpower. You know, who's going to do this? Services. We've talked about the gray area where 504s really don't provide a lot of direct service, but now you're telling me somebody has to teach the kid how to do this. You know, who's knowledgeable at the school? Who's going to buy in? There are a lot of things that make assistive technology implementation in 504 difficult. And I think that we do need to recognize some of that. And I would like to open up either the chat box right now or unmute yourselves. But, you know, as I'm kind of going through this best practice, this ideal world situation, what are some red flags that are coming out to you? Or what are some things that you find would be different?
Thank you. I also wanted to remind people with regards to 504s to make sure that you're carefully reviewing your new incoming 504 plans from students who transfer.
But did you already cover the 504 meeting to determine the eligibility of the student first before the accommodation such as the AT? So yeah, the student might have been found eligible for 504 protections first, and then the team might have to come to the table and determine what kind of stuff they want to try with that student. Or maybe the teacher already is kind of an SST. Maybe it was recommended that they try some of the built-in accessibility features in SST, and they already have data. So I could see it going both ways. If the team has enough trial data to make an informed decision at that first 504 meeting, assistive technology is put on there. But it might be that you guys don't have any data, and I'm really reluctant to say put assistive technology on a 504 plan when you absolutely have no indication that it's going to be effective or not. I would rather you put in the minutes that you are going to try it for a few weeks or a month or two and then come back. But you just have to make sure you come back and do that. That's my concern then, is that you'll never come back and it won't be documented. So as long as you guys can collect the data and bring it back and to add those accommodations to the 504, I think that's the best plan. All right, another one is I would like some information, see some of the AT offerings show up in Aspen. I really see the need for gen ed kids to have more access to these opportunities, especially students who struggle to put thoughts on paper immediately and have the skills, knowledge, opportunities to get up and go to a computer in the room, press a few buttons and get going. So I don't think Aspen or any program, just kind of like that consideration guide I showed you, is always going to have the most up-to-date tools and features. I think that you've identified the need of the student is struggling, and these are some different things to try. And then, of course, documenting that in the plan, but I don't want Aspen to be the limiting component of that process. We should be able to have more latitude than what maybe a drop-down list in Aspen might provide. Some other elephants in the room: accommodations and DCAS right now. It's under construction. there's been a lot of confusion out there, and it seemed for a while that maybe some classroom accommodations were being chosen based off of what was allowed on standardized accommodations, or the interim accommodations, or the DCAS accommodations. You know, pick your assessment tool. But they were letting the assessment tools drive the classroom accommodations, and it really should be the other way around. We want the classroom accommodations to drive the standardized accommodations. Now, there might be some standardized accommodations that the test developers have said, if you use this certain accommodation, it invalidates that test. We don't allow it because we are changing the test construct. So in that instance, the accommodation that student uses all the time in the classroom might not be allowed, but that's for one test, one assessment. The rest of the time, the student should be using that accommodation in the classroom, accessing the curriculum, and really benefiting from that accommodation to access the standards, the curriculum, the content, the assignments, and we need to be aware that sometimes those classroom accommodations will not be used during the assessments, but it's up to the test developer to set those requirements, or for DODEA to say we have mandated that these accommodations are allowed and these accommodations are not allowed. And what I'm trying to get from DODEA right now is some more clarification on kind of more one-stop shop on what that would look like. So for right now, though, classroom instruction and the interim assessments, the latest guidance on there is that the interim assessments are considered like classroom assessments. So any accommodation that has been used in the classroom should then be allowed on the interim assessments. That was the most recent guidance we've had. The question that I fear is coming up and that I don't feel like we have a solid answer yet is what that looks like on the actual assessment. So if a student does use speech recognition, if they do use text-to-speech for the questions and for the content, because that's what they're using in the classroom, how that actually looks in real life with the student. And so I'm working with different folks trying to build some more clarification on that. But in the meantime, it's just important to know that classroom instruction, access to the classroom, is what our original accommodation decisions should be. We do identify what standardized accommodations there should be too, but they should be a clear match. And then it's up to the testing developers or our agency to say that no, in this instance, we're not going to allow that for that one situation. But don't let one day of testing limit the student's access to a needed accommodation for the rest of the school year. So I'm getting something that's saying there have been a limited number of computers, laptops for all students within students needing computers on their 504 plans. Can more computers be allocated to the school through the DSO? That's why it's important that 504 and IEPs have assistive technology appropriately listed, because then it becomes a federal requirement that we provide these accommodations. And so right now the DSO is not in charge of computer allocation. That is a headquarters decision based off by IT. It really is up to the local school level to pull those computers from other areas, and it is triage. We're basically saying this student has a greater need to this computer than other students, and then it's up to the principal and to complain to the superintendents, and the superintendents complain to headquarters. Headquarters then addresses it with IT. But right now, if you have a kid that has a 504 or an IEP with assistive technology listed, and I hate to say this because it's not fair, but we've identified that because of this student's disability, they need this tool. We pull it from a computer lab. We pull it from a cow that makes it really difficult for that general ed teacher to use to do their lessons. So it's not a good situation, but it's a situation we're in. And we do need to be vocal about it, because if nobody knows it's a problem, then nobody will address it. All right. The equality concept, and this goes to those computers, and those different tools, we need to make sure we're choosing accommodations that we're not trying to get kids above the line. We're not trying to provide an unfair advantage, but we have found that for students with identified disabilities, and that's what that 504, that IEP process really is, saying that this student has a disability that's preventing access, that is, that with 504, it's a civil rights law. that we want to prevent discrimination based off of their disability. So these accommodations are in place to level the playing field. So some individuals might have significant accommodations, significant access to tools, where others might have minimal. But we do want to make sure that we're just providing access to that line, to that standard, that we're providing equality for those students. Again, I know that really sounds nice, and these nice little graphics of cute little levels and different bicycles. It sounds neat and it's clean, but in your reality, it can be messy, as we're just talking about the computers. To enable access to a student that needs it, we might have to steal it from another classroom that also needs it. And so basically, we're having to prioritize, and we are having to communicate. I encourage you that are having computer issues or having access issues, or you're having trouble buying things of that nature, that you first make sure your administrators are in the know. Or if you're unhappy with how technology is working, have you put in service desk tickets? Have you done some of those things so that there's a kind of a chain of follow-up? Because what I don't want to have happen is somebody complain to me like, we don't have access to computers and none of the things are working. But when I say, does admin know, or have there been service tickets put in, there's none of that. So just make sure we're going through the steps, we're documenting, and it's okay to complain. Let's just make sure we're complaining in a way that hopefully leads to positive outcomes. There's some other resources for you. The quiet and quality indicators for assistive technology. All of this information that I've shared with you today is based off of the quality indicators for 504s that I actually helped draft with some stateside experts in the field of assistive technology and 504s. For those of you in high school, I have talked about it a little bit, but those post-secondary education, even though it is post-secondary, really for our high school students, they cover a lot of skills, those self-advocacy skills for assistive technology that a lot of our students should be aware of. And then the granddaddy of them all is the quiet AT indicators, which relates more to our IDEA students. You will find within this presentation on the very back, I've put links, and I can put this on our show notes too, to all the different tools that I've referenced today, from the SET framework to our accommodation guide to access to our learning library, all the implementation planning documents, everything that I've kind of shown you today, you do have access to through these links, and I will share that. And so I do also ask that and I'll put this in the show notes too, that I do have an online feedback form if you could fill that out. But I would like to open up the last 15 minutes or so to more questions and answers. Feel free to put it in the chat box. I'll read them aloud and see if I can come up with answers, or feel free to unmute yourself and we'll have more of a dynamic discussion that way.